All right. Yes. So they're no live. So here we are, streaming live from the Association of Children's Museums Interactivity Conference here in Denver. I'm your host, Brad Larson of Brad Larson Media, and we're here to have some fun today and also learn about empathy. And we are actually broadcasting because I was hearing myself. I'm watching this on YouTube as we go here. So we're here to learn about empathy in exhibits, and we've got some great special guests up here that I'd like to introduce you to. So first, we have Robin Frisch. Let's do a little. Yeah. All right. Robin Frisch, Mindsplash experience director, has worked over 30 years with children and their families, including being on staff at a children's museum and a history museum. Robin is currently the experience director at Mindsplash and is passionate about developing exhibits for young children and their families to make a positive difference in their lives. Robin loves to take photographs of her incredible dog, Eli, and watching Eli doing something he loves, playing fetch in the backyard or exploring a new park. His gift is looking for joy wherever he goes, and that inspires her daily. Can you guys not hear? Okay, so let's come right up to the microphone here. All right, and next, and Robin is going to be speaking on behalf of Brianna Cutts, who could not be with us here today, but she's been doing some great work and some original thinking about what is it to design for empathy in exhibits, and what are some of the design considerations. So Robin has graciously volunteered to stand in for Brianna. As an adjunct faculty member at John F. Kennedy University, Brianna instilled in students the importance of planning interpretive experiences that engage visitors on cognitive, behavioral, and emotional levels. The topic of empathy fascinates Brianna, who is always on the lookout for interesting research studies. Brianna is currently writing a book, Story Orbit, a creative process for developing and designing museum exhibitions, published by Roman and Littlefield. So let's hear it again for both Robin and Brianna. All right. And next, we have Anne Fullenkamp. Anne is Director of Design at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, where she oversees the museum's internal and external design services, including permanent exhibits, galleries, and public spaces. Anne has been incorporating thoughts on empathy, love, and other topics in Children's Museum of Pittsburgh leading exhibits, including notably the exhibit XOXO, an exhibit about love and forgiveness. And last but not least, we have Brenda Baker. Brenda Baker is an artist, mother, and director of exhibits at Madison Children's Museum, where she has worked connecting the fields of art, ecological restoration, social justice, cultural geography, and early childhood education for the past 28 years. She is currently on the board of ACM. Brenda has her MFA in painting and sculpture and an undergraduate degree in art and cultural anthropology. Brenda likes to spend her non-work hour time chasing her family on skis or bikes, or frolicking in the woods, practicing her empathy skills with her dog and a flock of small farm animals, including 2 goats and a miniature donkey named Olive. So let's hear it for Brenda and her miniature donkey. All right, so I think we're ready. So we're going to dive into this and look, first of all, from a conceptual standpoint and design standpoint about empathy and exhibit. We're going to do a couple of tricky things right here. First, Robin and I are going to switch seats. But while we do that, I'm going to try to share this screen also on the broadcast. So let's hit screen share. And that looks right. And wow, yeah, pretty wild. And then let's do this. And oh my goodness. And then, yeah, that's it. Okay, so I think we're broadcasting the screen. We just want to get this message off to the side here, or not. Hide. Okay, let's just hide it. Okay. All right.
Hey, I'm excited to be here. I'm honored to be presenting Brianna's work. Brianna had wanted to create a framework that really addressed how empathy can be integrated into the design of exhibits. And she identified 3 key elements of empathy that she thought would be the key to doing this. Those 3 keys are, are curiosity, connection, and compassion. We're going to look at each one. Empathy. The feeling that you understand and share another person's experiences and emotions, and the ability to share someone else's feelings. And I have one quick example that I'll give. I used to teach preschool. I used to teach 3-year-olds, and I had 2 students, Deanna and Joy. It was Joy's birthday. We had cupcakes. Deanna dropped her cupcake. Deanna started to cry. Joy started to cry too. So I went over and calmed them down, cut the cupcakes in half. They each had one, and life was good again. But it really struck me how a 3-year-old could start crying because another child had dropped her cupcake. That to me was empathy at its finest. Okay, empathy is innate. And what do we mean by that? Children are born with the capacity for empathy. Children, newborn babies, and many of you may have done this, you can stick your tongue out at them, and a newborn baby will stick their tongue out back at you. And that is the very beginning of understanding what someone else is doing, the mimicking. And then as we bring our child home, we soothe our child. And soothing is their first experience of somebody doing something kind and empathetic for them. Then they learn to self-soothe, whether it be a pacifier or any ways that they find, but they're learning how to do that for themselves. From self-soothing comes the ability to soothe others. And it's exciting to see that develop. It's something that needs modeling, it needs practice, but it is there. And they learn this in many ways, not just from modeling, but stories and books and having people talk to them, and of course, from exhibits. Curiosity, a strong desire to know or learn something, an inquisitive interest in others' concerns. The first bullet that here is well known, and the second one gives us pause to think. Inquisitive interest in others' concerns. Wondering about the lives of others is one of the first steps towards empathy. Being a very good listener, asking questions, and when you really want to be empathetic and you're thinking about wanting to learn more about how someone's feeling, staying away from the why questions, because a why question can make someone feel defensive, but going into what, how, when, really listening and trying to understand. Curiosity, and curiosity is also innate. Children, as we know, are born wired to learn, to be curious. In this slide, I think the curiosity is definitely going both ways. So now we look at the 21st century, and we look at the 21st century trends. And unfortunately, we're finding that curiosity and empathy are going down. They're in a decline. The University of Michigan Institute for Social Research did a study. They started in 1979, and they studied college students who came to their campus, and they had some type of test that measured their empathy levels. And what they found is after the year 2000, the college students' empathy levels were 40% lower than those who had come before them starting in 1979. And this data looked at over 14,000 students. So what could be reasons for this? And these are not things that I'm sure these reasons are not new to you. Information overload, numbing, desensitizing. I was reading a study, there's a professor, Paul Slovak at the University of Oregon, and he coined a phrase called psychic numbing. Social media, we hear about how that can sometimes trivialize relationships. They don't have the richness and depth of face-to-face interactions. We also we hear quite a bit about narcissism. We learn about how as we're holding our mobile devices, we're looking down, we may be distracted and disconnected. And in my job, we do a lot of focus groups. And last year we did a focus group with a group of 6th grade educators. And what one of the teachers told me is one of the saddest things she sees is some of her students are more shy, more introverted than others. And she said she sees a tendency for those students to look down into their phone. And when they're doing that, it really cuts off anybody interacting with them. And they use that as a tool as they see someone approaching. And it just made her very, very sad to see that kind of thing happening. So let's look at the next part of Brianna's trilogy of what makes up empathy, and that is connection. A person connected with another, especially by marriage, kinship, or common interest. Our work in museums are based in connections in so many ways. Visitors creating connections with each other over exhibits, visitors creating connections by themselves with exhibits, children connecting with their peers as you see them building a structure together, a caregiver connecting with a child as they make a pattern together with blocks. There are so many connections. We also connect to new ideas, to new cultures. There are so many opportunities and ways that museums facilitate different kinds of connections. As Brianna did her work, she found some examples. The example she found is a program in Toronto, Canada called Wait, Watch, and Wonder. And this is a program, and the goal was to engage a parent to be reflective about their child's inner world of feelings, as you see on the slide. And what it was is parents would come in with mostly infants. It started at 4 months old. And the parent had some type of issue, some type of reason they felt that they weren't connecting. And so the therapist would go into a quiet room with the baby and the caregiver. It was many times the mother, but not always. And the therapist would encourage the parent to set the child down in the environment. I think there were some toys and things of that nature. And she told the parent, just wait. Just put your child down and wait. And as you wait, watch your child. Just watch. And as you're watching, I want you to wonder. Wonder about your child. Why do you think they may be doing this? What are they doing? And this ended up to be a powerful program. It wasn't just one session. They came, I think, for approximately 14 sessions. And by the end, the parent was so much, or caregiver was so much better able to understand the baby and what they were doing and why they were doing it. And again, something very powerful. We're learning so much about the power of attachment. When Brianna and I were talking about this, it also made me think about serve and return and joint attention, 2 other ways that parents and caregivers connect with their children. You see that a lot in museums. Serve and return, many of you may know, it's a dialogue. It's a type of dialogue between parents and children where children do not need to be verbal yet. I'm sure you've all seen and or done a baby, ba, ba, ba. And you look back, ba, ba, ba. Is that a ball? And you talk back and forth. That dialoguing, important connections are happening in a child's brain every time that dialogue happens. Joint attention is very similar. It's when a child and a caregiver, their attention are both on the same object and they're interacting. And it's even more powerful if the child points first and then the parent or caregiver follows that pointing or gaze and they interact together. Powerful attachment, powerful social, emotional, and language development happens. So these are the kinds of connections that can happen and relate to empathy as we work with see children and caregivers in museums. And then as we think about humans, we also think about animals. And I know Brenda will be getting to this in more detail, but Brianna had talked a little bit about the scientific debate that's happening. Can animals have empathy? She told me about a study where there were 2 rats, and the rats were in cages. The cages were connected with a door, and the door was closed, but one of the rats knew how to open it. Well, the rat that knew how to open the door was in a cage that had bedding and toys and food. It was a very enriched environment. The rat in the other cage had nothing, no toys, no bedding, no food. Well, after a little while, the rat that was in the very bare cage started to whine. Then whatever sound a rat makes to say they're unhappy, that rat was doing it. And the first rat, after a little while, opened the cage and let the other rat come in. So the debate is, was this selfless? Was this one rat knowing I have enough food, I will share, or was it selfish? I cannot listen to that noise anymore. we really don't know for sure. But what the scientists are starting to say is in animals, that kind of behavior, empathy in animals, if it does exist, is more behavioral, based on behaviors like that. In humans, it's cognitive. We think about it. We use our brains to process that type of empathy and what's happening. We usually, most psychologists say that empathy really, in its more of its truer form, starts at about 2 years old. And that's when children are able to really see and think about somebody else's feelings. It starts with them. They usually say they can do this when they've already been in that situation. For example, Joy may have one time dropped her cupcake, and that's why she knew Deandra was sad and started to cry. But then as children get a little bit older, they're able to really just start putting themselves in somebody else's place. And let's see, there's a book called Born for Love by Bruce D. Perry. And he says something interesting. Again, I'm sure all of you heard over and over, children are getting much less unstructured time to play, unstructured time outside, unstructured time to just be together. And what this book says, one of the tenets of the book is when children are outside, they can't get to know each other as well. I mean, when they aren't getting to unstructured time together, and therefore that empathy is not happening. Then Brianna started looking at the brain, and she found some research that says the right side of your brain is more holistic, the left side is more linear. And we've all heard about right brain, left brain. So if you think about holistic, some of the attributes were emotional intelligence, creativity, intuition, music, color, and imagination. The left was more known for language, logic, numbers, critical thinking, and reasoning. That would mean that empathy would probably fall more on the right side and survival more on the left side. So you think about empathy, caring for others, survival, caring about yourself. Right in the middle of that could fall compassion. And compassion was the third element that Brianna talked about. And it's about, of course, having compassion, caring about someone else more than yourself. The definition she found was sympathy for others in distress and the desire to alleviate that stress. So as she thought about exhibit design, she thought about curiosity, connection, and compassion as the road to empathy. And I have one quote for you that I found that I love by Alfred Adler. He's an Austrian doctor and psychotherapist. Empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another.
All right, and next we're going to try to seamlessly switch here over to Anne.
So 2 years ago when we did this talk, I talked about our exhibit XOXO. So we designed that in 2014 to really talk about love and forgiveness. And in the end, the exhibit really became about communication. And it kind of plays off of what we just heard, that at the core, when we wanted to create an exhibit that children and families and parents and people could interact with that conveyed love and forgiveness, at the core, it was really about how people communicate with one another. So we communicate with our voices, with words, with our faces, and through writing. So we created a space, and we tried to design a space where people could have meaningful conversations and spend meaningful time with one another. And frankly, in a very low-tech, personal way. So we had used a lot of design devices to try to create these comfortable spaces. And once we started the tour in 2014, we found that there were these key elements that were consistent in the exhibit, and we were, to our a little bit of a surprise, because when we did this exhibit, it was a bit of an experiment. At our museum in Pittsburgh, we're kind of set up for some, and our visitors are set up to do some things in a less conventional way. But we weren't absolutely sure if this would work when it went on the road. But it did. And again, what was reinforced to us at the time was these key elements of giving people spaces and tools and devices to communicate with one another. And then the visitors and the audience, in whatever community you were in all across the country, the community, the local or museum community or the regional community could bring their local experiences and make it very personal. So that was the other kind of key part of this. So as we went along, and as an exhibit designer, it was really interesting because we really kept taking steps backwards in terms of the amount of prescriptive experiences. We provided enough to get people started, but we also gave them a lot of room to bring their own information, their own personal experiences, and make it feel personal. So for us, it was kind of a turning point in how we think about exhibit design. And it gave us confidence in knowing that we don't have to have all the answers. And it also gave us more confidence. It was kind of empowering to see that audiences and people in general are thoughtful when given the chance, when you take the screens away, when you have a parent and child together, and if you give them a moment of quiet, they can have these meaningful experiences. And the other thing that was kind of exciting for us is that we knew it worked at a children's museum because we did it. And we were lucky and privileged enough to be working with a research fellow from the University of Pittsburgh, the Center of Learning in Out-of-School Environments, which is one of our partners. But we had a PhD fellow who did the evaluative summary evaluation and did a summative evaluation for us, and we were able to see that. But then once it started to travel, we had museums that frankly wouldn't normally take children's museum exhibits, including the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville, Kentucky, and the Canadian Museum of Human Rights, who were interested in this idea of love and forgiveness. So they approached us and rented the exhibit. So we were able to see how the exhibit worked in entirely different settings for entirely different audiences. And at the core, those experiences still worked. So again, what I'm going to do today, we're going to look through some of these core interactive experiences and then see how we've been able to adapt it over in the last 5 years, but especially since we talked 2 years ago, we've had some opportunities to repeat this experience and kind of have this exhibit evolve. So this slide shows a couple of the interactives. The top row is our silhouettes exhibit. And in this experience, two people sit across from one another, and you have to look, if you're, you have to work together. You have to have two people, and one person is the artist who's drawing someone else's silhouette. And so why this has worked is that each person has to respond to the other, and you have to take that role and you have to cooperate. So if you're the person who's being drawn, you have to sit still and be quiet and be patient. And then if you're drawing someone, you're really looking at them closely. So we kind of set up this scenario where it only worked with two people. There was no need to really communicate. So it's really a quiet experience, and it kind of forced people to look at one another. And one of the things, because it's really not about drawing an accurate silhouette, because it's just a simple shadow box. You're drawing a profile. So it isn't about art or drawing. It was kind of this device to get two people to spend time looking at one another closely. And also, if you're the subject, being patient, being quiet, kind of taking that moment. And it was lovely. We saw a lot of parent-child engagements where the parent is drawing the child, but also, of course, the child wanting to draw the parent. And here, too, it's cross-generational. We have a grandparent being drawn. And then we also did have a lot of kids drawing one another. But this has turned out to be a lovely experience because it was almost completely silent. And it wasn't about who was a good, skilled artist or not. And it kind of just put people in a different frame of mind. And then the bottom two pictures show an exhibit where you have to work together to complete a circuit that then lights up a message. So again, we did this where we have a simple device like a mirror. Everyone understands mirrors, and frankly, we're human beings. We cannot resist looking at ourselves in a mirror. So what we did was we put these hand plates. So there's a curiosity factor. What happens when I put my hands on these two plates? Then this inspiring message comes up, which was fun. We also experimented where we created the size of the mirror so that the hand plates were just far enough away that you had to hold someone else's hands to complete the circuit to see the message. So that was wonderful too, because you saw family groups or friends who came together doing this and cooperating, working together. But we also saw visitors helping other visitors explain what happened. So there's no signage instructions. It was just a symbol, put your hands here. And that moment of discovery was really great. But yet from a design standpoint too, we had one that could be done by yourself. And then we had the one that you needed a partner. So again, we're not being too prescriptive. We're also letting one of the experiences let someone get the gist of it, and then they can say, oh, and then bring a friend over. We need to hold hands to complete that circuit. And then the reward is an inspiring message. So the other exhibit components we created were a bunch of telephones, and it's so funny. It was really old school analog phone booth telephones. But this idea of how you can use your voice and the tone of your voice and how it affects has an effect. And so this idea where we had you're speaking into a telephone headset, and then you get a visualization of what your voice looks like depending on the tone. And that was really fun. And then we also found that kids, especially, which was interesting because there was a lot of debate about whether children would understand the whole phone booth concept. Of course they did. We do this, but then sitting down and then kind of having conversations either with somebody else, because we have 4 sets of phones in the exhibit, and it's always with a pair that's connected, so you can hear someone at the other end of the telephone. But really just talking to the phone and having those kind of quiet, intimate conversations, in addition to seeing their voice. So again, there's a reward. A bit of a cause and effect, but also all these experiences kind of became more quiet and more intimate. So that was something that we really took note of. So this is the traveling exhibit, 2,000 square feet, and goes to traditional museums. So the next step, we wanted to see how we could bring these core messages and do it in a way that was more accessible, and frankly, to get it to more communities and more people who wouldn't necessarily have access to a traveling exhibition. And we had been talking about this in the museum for many years. But sadly, there was a tragedy in Pittsburgh in October of 2018. There was a shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue where 11 people were killed. And so we used that opportunity, or we were approached, let me say this, we were immediately approached by the community in general to what can you do to help? So we immediately, in about 2 hours, figured we can bring out some of these activities from XOXO. Super easy. We did writing, and we changed our art studio into an immediate, just-in-time XOXO pop-up exhibit. And we just put the exhibits out, and we had our art studio as an immediate pop-up XOXO exhibit for about a week. And that was part of the community's local grieving process for what had happened. So we saw this and said, you know what, this is the time. We're not going to wait for a funder. We're not going to wait for this and keep talking about one day doing XOXO again. We used this experience, and we made a pop-up that goes out to the community, and again, in these just-in-time moments. So it can go to community centers, other museums, wherever you need these XOXO experiences, we can bring it to you. So what we did is we took 4 of the experiences. One is our response wall, where you can write a message and hang it on a wall. These pictures show the original. So then, so you can see it's really simple, just tags on a wall. And it's a simple question of how has someone been kind to you. But the nice thing about this piece is you can pose any question, whatever your community is dealing with or whatever you want to communicate, but then really having a way to display and let people see other people's thoughts and feelings is incredibly cathartic and creates a sense of empathy. And it's really been an emotionally powerful experience to see that. And then the other experience from the main exhibit that we created in the pop-up is called Release the Negative. And this is where you write something, a sad feeling or a tough feeling that you're dealing with or frustration. You write your negative words down on the paper and then you can shred it. So this idea that you're releasing these negative emotions and then you can turn it into something positive. And then the other experience we actually added were these kindness buttons. And it's really a simple thing where I was caught being kind, Pittsburgh kids, and we had a little hashtag, but this idea that you're taking this button and you can give it to someone who's done something kind for you. And again, creating these relationships make people think about what they're doing and how people have helped them, and really kind of really trying to create personal connections around the idea of kindness and empathy. And then love letters. Again, this idea of writing your feelings and messages and then sharing with the community and posting them, but also with love letters, you can seal it in an envelope and keep it private. So again, that's another part of one of the writing activities we have in Love and Forgiveness, that it's wonderful to share if you can, but it's not necessary. Just communicating and getting those feelings out can be so cathartic, and it can actually make you feel more empathetic, but you don't necessarily have to share it. And that's part of the whole emotional arc of when you're dealing with the tough emotions. It gets people just used to communicating. And actually, kids who might not want to share, when they're writing, it started great conversations where an adult caregiver, an adult might start talking to the child about what they were writing about, or a child might ask how to express or how to write something. And the other thing about all these writing activities, it also, of course, works with drawing, and especially with kids. So we would see pictures, and it was just really, here's some great examples. And I mean, over the years, it's been, some of the messages we've seen have been really special. And then there was the photo op. Again, human beings, we are very narcissistic. We love to see ourselves. And especially, it's funny, since this opened in 2014, Instagram and phones and cameras, it's even exploded. So these pop-up videos with or these pop-up photos that people take pictures of themselves with different messages have really kind of taken over the Instagrams. So this was the first pop-up we did in the community in December of 2018. We had an opportunity, there was a vacant storefront in downtown Pittsburgh. So for the holiday season, they asked if we would be interested, and we asked if we could bring XOXO, our pop-up. So you can see it's really low cost, simple tables with tablecloths. So we have our response walls. We have photographs from Instagram, because that's the other thing that's happened really in the last 5 years, that people, in the traveling exhibit, are using Instagram and taking pictures of what they've written or of themselves in XOXO and are posting it and sharing that at another level. And adults love this too. So the other thing too, all this is very low cost, very immediate and direct. And so the other big part of XOXO were these quotes and inspirational quotes, because we know we don't really, we aren't experts in everything, and especially in love and forgiveness. So we relied heavily on inspirational quotes. So that's where the whole traveling exhibit, it originated in a more traditional way, and how over the years we were able to find really simple, direct, immediate things to make the exhibit more accessible and affordable and immediate, and really create a system in that just-in-time moment. So.
All right, and Brenda.
All right, so Anne was really focusing on one exhibit and how that changed over time and how she was able to, the museum was able to learn as they went along to improve everyone's experience of love and kindness and empathy. And what I'm going to do today is show you a few examples that focus on cultural and bioempathy through many different exhibits and programs, because there are lots of ways to design your spaces and incorporate empathy into exhibits that aren't specifically about the topic or the content area itself. So why cultural and bioempathy? The main three reasons would be increasing our understanding of others. That's one of the goals. The other is decreasing stereotypes of one another. And the third one, the one that I care a lot about, is increasing our caring behavior toward others and the planet. Okay. There's kind of three levels of empathy that we see in museums oftentimes. Cognitive empathy is kind of what Brianna and Robin were talking about, the perspective taking, understanding where another person is coming from. If we can move beyond that, it's even better. So we're in museums, we're trying to, which it'd be great if we can get to the third level. The second one is emotional empathy, or sometimes called affective empathy. And that's when you actually feel another person's concerns, almost as if the concerns were contagious. And then the final step, of course, is behavioral empathy, or being compassionate empathy. And that's when you feel another person's concerns and you're compelled to action. So oftentimes, in our exhibits, we hit the cognitive empathy in terms of knowledge, expanding knowledge. But if we can get people to move toward the behavioral empathy and changing their behavior, as what we just saw happened in some of the instances in the examples that Anne showed, that's the level we want to get to. Okay. So I'm going to, in doing the sort of talk show kind of event here, I'm going to take from David Letterman and do a top 10 list, strategies to build cultural and bioempathy through exhibits and programs. And I'm going to show lots of different varieties. So at our museum, Madison Children's Museum, we have a very inclusive exhibit development process. And so these are photographs from an exhibit that we developed a long time ago as part of the Asian Exhibits Initiative. And I'm showing these pictures that are from a long time ago because the process that we did then has really influenced everything else that we've done. And while we haven't had the necessarily the resources to do this level of inclusive exhibit development, since then we've learned a lot and we use as much as we can whenever possible. So basically, the Hmong people, when they came to the United States after the Vietnam War, they fought for the United States. When they came as refugees, they had lost their land. They were promised by the US government that they could come to the United States and live their life. Well, it didn't turn out that way for them. They were an agrarian culture, animist society. They lived in the hills and didn't have much electricity. So imagine being plopped in Minnesota or Sacramento or Wisconsin or North Carolina. Those are the places where a lot of people landed, and not knowing the language, not knowing how to use electricity, and all of those things. So when the Hmong people first came, there was so much there was violence against them. They, had large families. They were moving into apartments and butchering their chickens in the parking lot of their apartments. And there was so much lack of cultural understanding about one another that it caused huge problems. So when we decided to take on this, to do an exhibit about Hmong culture for the Asian Exhibits Initiative, we had to start with a very, very inclusive exhibit development process because there was so much lack of understanding about one another. So, and again, this process is something that we've taken forward in every exhibit we've done. But what we did is we first hired somebody from the Hmong community, Peng, who's up in the upper left-hand corner. We hired him for a 3-year job at the Children's Museum. We got a couple of people from the Hmong community to sign up on our board. We met with the elders in the Hmong community and talked about what they would need in order to build trust. And basically, we ended up having lunch with the Hmong elders that you see in the lower right-hand corner every week for 2.5 years. And the Hmong women we provided a stipend to them, and the Hmong women made meals for us every single week. And it took a year before we could even talk about what we were going to include in the exhibit, because they didn't even know that they wanted to do an exhibit with us when we started. But that exhibit development process also included thinking about our audience and who was coming to the museum and how they would interpret the information. So we also hired a fourth grade classroom to work with us for an entire year, and with the Hmong community. So they also joined us for these meals occasionally with the Hmong elders. We ended up going on a Hmong cultural tour of Wisconsin for a whole week. We rented a bus and took the school group, and we went to visit. We went to a Hmong funeral. We went to we went to a butcher shop. We went to meet with some embroidery, some women who did embroidery. And then the kids helped us with the exhibit development. So we got to see their interpretation of understanding Hmong culture through their eyes. So the exhibit development process was just so wonderful. And again, we're keeping that as we go forward with everything else. But what ended up happening is that there was a huge, a better understanding of the children, the children that we worked with. There were some Hmong kids in that classroom, and the kind of understanding that they had of one another, and compassion and caring for one another was something that I'm just so proud of. It was such a great experience. So now number 9, create immersive environments. So there's lots of evidence that that children and adults alike both learn more effectively when they're in immersive environments. So the difference between having an exhibit component that is just a standalone component that doesn't have the context or an immersive environment around it, it's much easier for children to get into character, to slip into another time or place, to trade roles, if they feel like they're immersed in a playful, creative environment where they can, they can have more fantasy and that kind of thing. And the whole idea of role playing and fantasy, of course, is learning another viewpoint. And so that's what they're practicing when they're pretending that they're a butterfly, or pretending that they're a pirate or whatever, and that they're in an environment that supports that. They're trying on different roles, which helps, of course. This is an exhibit we did called Liberia at Play, and this is a palava hut, and this is in Liberian culture and many other African societies. This is a hut where social justice and restorative justice happens. So the way of solving problems oftentimes, if there's somebody that does something that's not approved in the community, instead of being punished and sent to prison or whatever, they have a restorative justice system. And so this was our exhibit about Liberia, but the Liberian community really wanted us to have this as a centerpiece of it, because it was a place where kids could practice role playing of how do you solve problems and see the other person's point of view. And then this is this is not a cultural exhibit. This is our water exhibit in our museum, in our early learning space. But I wanted to show it just because, just in terms of design, another easy thing to do is to create opportunities where kids are working around one another in a circular fashion, so that they're facing each other, so they can see each other's faces if one of them's, if one of them has trouble or whatever. It's just a really great way for kids to share, kids who didn't necessarily come together, but they can then work together in interesting ways. I wanted to say another thing about seating, because I know in my 28 years of being in the field that a lot has changed about how we think about seating in museums. When I first started, I remember learning that we should make our seating as uncomfortable as possible, and so that people didn't sit down, because adults needed to play with their kids. And now, I think the philosophy has changed, that let's give parents and caregivers more comfortable seating. Let's put it in situations where they can face each other, that is comfortable, where they can learn from one another and share stories with one another. So that's just another thing about that whole idea of designing it in a circular fashion. Another thing is providing context, scaffolding, and in order to help guide visitors reflect on their own culture. Again, when we approached the Hmong exhibit, it was a really complicated content area for many of our visitors who didn't really understand even that the people in our community were refugees. They were invited here by our country. And so we developed not only a parent guide about Hmong culture that helped scaffold the experience, so that kids weren't, everyone comes in with some stereotypes, but the idea is that you don't want to reinforce negative stereotypes. You want to you want to perpetuate and provide context and scaffolding so people can understand one another in a different way. But in addition to doing a guide about Hmong culture, we really spent a lot of time thinking about how do we make the exhibit content more accessible by having everyone understand that they have their own culture, that everyone in this room, everyone who comes to the museum, you have your own culture, whether you realize it or not. So this Kids Field Guide to Local Culture is available on our website. It's, it's really, really wonderful, and we use it all the time. And it basically helps kids understand that, understand other people by first looking at yourself. So like, what did you have for dinner? And basically, what kind of a house do you live in? And then understanding where those things come from so that you can then be more empathetic to other people. Here's just another example of in one of the exhibit environments, and a quote from one of our visitors, because we really spent a lot of time not just talking about Hmong culture, but also our kids' own culture at the same time. And also role playing. So role playing, again, that whole idea of being able to try on someone else's life for just a little bit is really, really a great way to encourage empathy. Here are two examples. The image of the two girls planting eggs. This was in our Frank Lloyd Wright exhibit, which is a cultural exhibit about Frank Lloyd Wright grew up in Madison, and this was really the kids here were overheard, saying that one of the girls was planting vegetables, and another one came up along and said, let's pretend we're turtles. And she was sharing her knowledge of that turtles lay eggs in the sand. So they went from role playing, planting a vegetable garden, to finding some eggs in the chicken coop nearby and pretending that they were turtles. And that whole idea of trying on a different viewpoint and working together is what we did here. Okay. This, I got to move faster here. This is a small exhibit we did very similar to what Anne was mentioning about getting kids in the community to show kindness, the Pinwheels of Promise program. This is a really great one. We have baby dolls in our early learning space, but baby doll bath time is a really wonderful, easy to do program that corresponds with that exhibit, where kids are taking care and washing babies. Another way to show care and kindness. The idea of having community gathering spaces where the community can come together to feel part of something larger is a great way to show empathy. Yoga classes and cooking classes where kids are sharing their home recipes, their cultural recipes. Okay. Creating opportunities for emotional connections. We've got a Spark program at our museum where we have adults with memory loss who are integrated and doing programs just right alongside some of the kids in our visitors, our young visitors. Pass that one. And then we have a first-time parent membership program, which we just started, where families can get free memberships under 18 months, or when their first child, up to when that child is 18 months. And this has been just a wonderful program in terms of, we've got classes specifically for the new families, the first-time parent members. But we also do lots of special events where we're, like this was the baby's first Halloween, which is a really wonderful way. And we do this photo, just something super simple, a photo opportunity for parents and kids to take these wonderful pictures. And I just love, this is one of my favorite pictures. I just love it, how tender that man looks toward his child. Celebrating similarities, not differences, is something that is really important in terms of promoting empathy. And we do know that both adults and children alike, they show more empathy for people they feel are similar. So if we can highlight the similarities rather than differences, so this case just showed like, a doll made in Hmong culture versus a doll made in the traditional American culture. Again, in that Liberia exhibit, showing that kids everywhere climb, and showing empathy by having in our rooftop programming, where kids are learning that everybody needs a home, including bees, solitary bees, and so kids making animal hotels, insect hotels for themselves is a way to show care and love. It's very, very easy to put up images and short little messages that show, that reinforce the idea of love and kindness and empathy. And it's true that that people show more empathy when they're instructed or told or reminded to do so. So the signage does help. Storytelling and listening, again, using real voices of real people so that kids can connect is really important. Real artifacts, real photographs. And then, of course, creating wow experiences that spark joy and curiosity. Just the idea of playing together and making just wonderful environments where kids can work together and play together is what we do best. But the joyful experiences, again, the ideas of having families playing together and doing programming together, where they're in a small space doing something as a group. And then lastly, and most importantly, plants and baby animals. This is there's been, again, research that shows that the #1 way kids can learn empathy and practice empathy until age 7 is by interacting with plants and baby animals. So these are photographs from our rooftop, but we have a chicken adoption program. We've adopted out chickens to over 200 families in Madison, so they first learn how to care about chickens at our rooftop garden, and then they can then adopt them and take care at their own homes. The whole idea that the interaction with little children with baby animals also helps them show empathy. Here's a sign that was made based on learning about young animals at the Children's Museum. We've got a pigeon release program. So even the whole idea that animals sometimes that in your community might not be the favorite animal, like a lot of people don't think pigeons are really great, but we have a pigeon release program where we train pigeons and then send them off to schools. Kids can write notes on them. And so even the whole idea of letting kids learn that all animals have value is important. Again, pollinators and bees and doing programs relating to pollination. Seed saving is a program that we've been doing so that kids understand the cycle of life. Pollinators, again, butterflies, learning to be respectful and how you touch and care for animals that fly. We do aquaponics and worm composting. Again, that whole idea that focusing on the animals in our own backyard. So these are fish from the Madison lakes and worms from, down the street. And then watering, planting, and weeding, of course, is a really great way for kids to get started learning to care for others. And so the whole idea of expanding the notion of empathy to also include plants and animals, I think is really important, especially as we face all the kind of ecological crisis that we face today, and also the social justice challenges that we have. I think the whole idea of thinking more about how we can have cultural empathy and empathy for all living things. I think I'm going to end right there. So yeah, so thank you.
Right. Thank you, Brenda. So now it's 4:45. We have 15 minutes, and I think we'll do like 5 minutes of questions, and then for the last 10 minutes, we have some prizes. And we thought we would give those to people who come up with examples they've seen, either in their own exhibits or other exhibits of empathy in exhibits. But we'll start out with about 5 minutes of questions. So does anyone have a question for? Oh yeah. So Anne, you can explain our empathy.
So, what we'll do is we'll talk to people and a question, and then after that, pass it on to the next person through the crowd. So who wants? If I have a question, we start the board out here. Anyone here? I don't know through the board. I wrote down a question here at the beginning when it talked about children have to have unstructured time with other children. And one thing that, as a parent, I wonder often, should I or when should I intervene during that unstructured time if a child is not showing empathy? At what point do I need to go and teach, or does that need to be a separate time during more structured play? Do I let them work through it? And I think it applies to museums also.
Every situation's different and you have your own intuition, but what I would do is use it as a teachable moment. I would stop it before another child's feelings were being hurt and try and redirect and talk about what's going on, asking the questions, and then figuring out what is happening and let them help you think of how it can be resolved really empowers them. Yeah, right, and it depends on ages. This author was talking about how kids, when they're outside playing and they're making their own rules about hide and seek or baseball, and they're working together and getting to know each other. But depending on age, yeah, you do want to probably be listening with one ear, and again, coming in to facilitate and using it as a teachable moment and empowering them.
Who else? Yeah. You can toss it. Yeah. 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 Get it back. There you go. Yeah.
Unless you can sit there and, pull off their time, because my grandson loves to
Right. Right. Well, it's funny when you were saying illiterate, we say pre-literate for that age group. But what we have found in those moments of the drawing activities, in particular the release to negative and I'll say with all of the exhibit components in XOXO, we try to create a yin and yang, a positive and negative balance, and it was about balance. And the other approach to the way we design exhibits is we want to have an experience for where you are. So obviously a 2-year-old's experience in the exhibit is going to be different than an older child. So at the drawing activities, they might be scribbling. If again, as the caregiver, the adult, if you want to have a conversation that maybe or start introducing symbol language. We had, and I don't know if you can see in any of these pictures, but we also had, actually it's right here, between the two writing activities that were a little older, and I don't know where you saw it, so I don't know if it was actually set up like this, but we had a puzzle for the youngest children, and it was an infinity puzzle with just pictures and words, so you could start teaching the words that one day, when you do become literate, of empathy and kindness. So it was words like, it's on the puzzle, it's words like respect, kindness, helper, and then you could, and as an infinity puzzle, it never ends. And so there's a picture symbol, a word, and then this ribbon that keeps going. So that infinity puzzle was designed to be that link for the pre-literate 2-3-year-olds, so that the older, especially if you're with a group, the older children could be right there. And maybe as a caregiver or parent, you could start introducing the language to use and have those conversations. But, frankly, if a 2-year-old is going to scribble, a 2-year-old is going to scribble. And then, or a 4-year-old, right. And then for a 4-year-old too, when you start talking about even how you make those marks, are they making, thoughtful, careful, quiet marks, or are they like, and then that was kind of, witnessed starting points of like, well, why are we scrubbing? What's going on there? But to balance that in the whole exhibit, we also had something where it's a big vat of beads, and it was kind of calming. So we had what we tried to do is to have some physical experiences that could help regulate those emotions and physical reactions. So like the balanced seesaws. So if there was that kind of energy of just writing or scribbling, well, maybe it's time to go to the balanced seesaw and think about something else. But that was, in particular with the writing activities, our choice was to do the infinity puzzle, where if before you have the words, we're kind of doing some early vocabulary on the words of empathy and kindness and matching them with pictures. Mm-hmm.
wasn't time. And there was nobody there to really back. At least the time I was there, it wasn't.
Were you, was it in Pittsburgh? Oh. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard for me to speak to the specific day and space. We have facilitators in our exhibit spaces that would have, and most of our facilitators in exhibits where we have writing and activities like that, they kind of tend to be there. That's like their base camp to help facilitate that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I mean, yeah, it's again, obviously, everyone brings their own experience. It's hard for us. But one thing we did do, we were repetitive in the words that we used throughout the exhibit to try to, like, if you're not ready, maybe this is the first time and you're not in the mindset, but in even the cards that you held up, we were just being really redundant in the words we were using. So maybe it's like a way to introduce that in the future. One thing too with the, this way, let me see here. Well, it's funny, kids loved these. So in the exhibit, and again, I don't quite remember when it was in Minnesota. So the counter to release the negative with the shredder is you made a token. So it was the paper crusher. And the idea there is you're making something and giving it to somebody else. They love that. So that was kind of where you're holding something on and then giving that away. And then this was is a program, but this idea we also had in the art making center, I don't know if they were making envelopes, but this idea that you're doing something and sharing and giving it away. And then it was these, the tone phones and the talking too, for the youngest visitors, you could still just make a sound. And but it is, that's the risk of exhibits like this. It really relies on the visitors. And we, as exhibit designers, like I said before, we do lose a certain amount of control. And it was a choice we made. And for a topic like love and forgiveness, long-term and the breadth of communities and the different experiences that we think that we've witnessed over time, we feel it was better to be more broad than to be like too prescriptive. But those are those moments, especially with the 2 to 4 year olds, that it's pretty sophisticated for a 2 to 4 year old.
One of the best things we can do is, first of all, give out our prizes. If you have additional questions, I think we'll all be hanging out for a while. And also tonight or tomorrow you can catch up. But what would be great is to get some little ideas going back and forth. If you have like 3 sentences from an exhibit that you either have seen at your museum or another museum, to just quickly describe them and see how many of these ideas we can get going in the next 5 minutes. So, Anne, you want to take it away and see if you can, who has an example? Quick example. Yes, so they didn't back there first. Yeah.
Cool is they're using big blue blocks, a lot of us have. And they started with, they use a puppet. You could easily use an actor or actress buried in this mass of big blue blocks. And or he or she's crying and are just very depressed and everything's wrong. And you got to look at these kids that come up wanting to know what's wrong. And the reply ultimately is that someone destroyed the house. You can all probably finish the story now, because what you have is everyone jumping in and building a house for the character. I just thought it was absolutely great. We use big blue blocks all the time. I'm going home and putting either a puppet or actress.
Yeah.
And doing it because it's pre-formed, but we all know the outcome. It's going to work. There to show for it.
Yeah, thanks. Great example. Any other examples? Yes. Go ahead. Just quick. We've got a few minutes. Sure.
I work with Every Children's in Nevada. They have a children's hospital exhibit where the children can go in here for 7 different and isolate, and each baby has a different patient chart with different ailments. And those tools are, like the ball syringes, real tools when you can safely so they give care for all of them. It's really fun to watch babies to be carefully they hold them, how they're treated.
Yeah, great example. Thank you. A couple more. So this hand over here. Yeah.
We have a exhibit at the Museum. It's called Twilight Trail. We did it when you put a campfire that lights up and it has a switch. You can turn the campfire on or you can turn it off. And we found, like sometimes it's off and we'll walk past it, we'll turn it on. And several times I've done this when I'm trying to say, no, I've left the camp. We have to turn the fire out because we don't want anything to burn.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I think we have one more prize left. Is that right? And I saw.
So after the first half, we are connected to the Netherlands, of course, and what is our university in the exhibit on the World War II, because that is what the Netherlands very and they have a Jewish historical museum, and they have like this big wall, and it talks about the kids in the war were being afraid, and the kids could write. It's like a little bit like your wall. They could write when they were afraid for the last time. And when you watch the wall, you see that I was afraid of spider, but next to it is like how my mom died in the middle of the night. And my kid was like, how can that, how the kid be afraid of spiders and look at that? And that's why you have to talk identity, right? That being scared can have different grades, and everybody has a right to be scared. And I thought it was a pretty cool exhibit.
Right.
All right. Well, I think that draws us. Nice. All right. That draws us to a close here. I think I want to thank all of our guests here today. Fantastic. And also, I want to thank all of you, first of all, just for showing up here. I think this is a really important topic, and for us to get together and talk about specifically what is it to design for empathy. Hopefully, these conversations will keep going, and then we will catch up again later on the Empathy Show live. All right. And here we are. All right, bye. We're done.